Thanks a lot for this connection. And despite the coronavirus, we work hardly to promote our books. And your last book by Codice Edizioni is one of the best of the season. And so I would like to share with our public your point of view, your opinion, because this is the fourth book we published.
Oh, that looks beautiful.
This is the cover. Together the previous one, the wine and beer. The first question is on your work together. Yes, you are a paleontologist, Bob is a neuroscientist. Which is the difference between the natural history of wine and natural history of beer?
Well, the difference is a history is more written, more done by historians, and natural history is more about the natural world. I think that's the best way to explain it. Our attempt with all three of these books has been to create a lens to look at natural history, to look at science. And the lens for the first one was wine, the lens for the second one is beer, the lens for the third one will be spirits. So it's a pretty fuzzy alcohol-driven lens that we're looking through, but it's all about science, and that's the best way to explain it. The history is part of it, though, because the history is part of anthropological cultural context, and Ian can address that a little bit.
We're using, as Rob says, these three different categories of drink as a prism to see science, and science as a way to see these three different categories of drink. And what I am really surprised at is how different these three books are. As you know, you published them both. You know, they're very different books.
But your experience on beer is the same as in wine, because I've been very impressed some years ago when I received your proposal of Time in the Bottle, a natural history of wine. The last sentence of the proposal was, both together they have more than century in wine tasting experience.
It has to be true.
Well, that's the one similarity between that'll cross all three books, is that each chapter starts off with us tasting something, and it's usually a very new experience for both of us. A new bottle of wine, a new kind of beer, and a special kind of peated whiskey, that kind of a thing. So there is that element of it, and there's a lot of field work and a lot of research that we have to do for this, which is a lot of fun.
Fortunately, we can do a lot of that research indoors.
Yeah.
Well, so for beer, you have to come back to Italy, because there are many producers, little producers. They do fantastic work on beer. And so one question is on the development of this habit, because Italians are very used to drink wine, yeah, and beer in the common sense is Germany, is some part of Ireland or England and so on. But we have more and more producers, particularly little producer of very, very good beer.
Oh yeah.
Which is
I
your
also drink a lot of beer.
Yeah.
In Italy.
Yeah.
Every cafe has a
beer
tap.
Sure.
Yeah. I think what's really happening in Italy is the craft beer industry is really taken off, and your regular beers like Moretti and Peroni and your other standard beers are pretty good, but both Ian and I have had a chance to experience the craft brew scene in Bra, Italy, and if the rest of Italy is anything like that, then it's a very vibrant scene, and I'm convinced it's a pretty vibrant scene there for craft brewery. So it's a great place. It really is.
In fact, you know, one of our chapter heading beers was an Italian, and it was the most way out beer, I think.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
We had in the book.
You studied together the influences of beer in the anthropological and physical and mental development. Which is the boundary between the good and the worst of beer or wine, to taste beer or wine in our experience, in our daily behavior?
Well, you know, no, I think I think of this more in terms of our own personal history that Rob and I have lived through. 30 years ago, we lived in the country that had the most boring beer anywhere, even worse than South Africa. It was a boring beer scene. And now we have a very lively beer scene. Incredible. Now we're in a beer vana, as they say, right? And so this, in our lifetime, has been a big change from a beer desert to beer vana.
6,000 breweries, 6,000 microbreweries in the United States.
Yeah.
We have about 330 million people here. So if you do the math, it's about, I don't know, about one brewery per every 50,000 people, something like that. Australia is on par with us. They're pretty good. They have 600 breweries, but they have 1/10 of the number of people that we have. So I think Ian's absolutely right. The last 10 years has just exploded with great beer. The other thing that's really been great is that home brewing used to be kind of a, you know, just a really hidden hobby. It wasn't until Jimmy Carter's term here in the United States that home brewing is even legal at home. And so the home brew scene has just exploded too. It's just amazing too. I think that has a lot to do with beer's imagination and the breadth of kinds of beers that people can drink. The home brewers are very experimental and have a lot of fun doing it. So those two things together, I think, make beer, make our attraction to beer. Like I said, we wouldn't have written this book 30 years ago. It would have been 3 pages long. It would have been like the Snakes of Ireland, or, you know, something like that.
Yeah.
So
tasting beer more maybe than tasting wine is a very high social behavior, social relation. I was one time in Munich for the Oktoberfest. It's a very, very funny and crazy experience.
It was.
But so, which is the social meaning of tasting beer?
Yeah, but you know, wine and beer have different places in human existence. They have separate places. You're not drinking one at the expense of the other. You drink them on different occasions to do different things for different reasons, and they can coexist together very well.
I think that the real beauty of beer versus wine, if you want to compare it to wine, is I always find wine tasting somewhat stiff, haughty. You have to kind of, you can't fake your way through wine tasting, and that's really bad for me because I'm not an enophile. But beer, you can really use your gut instinct and your really deep down taste and feeling for things. So that's at least the preference for me.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the fact is that I think wine tasting is more formalized. There's more of a tradition of comparing wines. It's more of a tradition, an etiquette that has built up around it. And I think beer tasting is much more spontaneous.
Yeah. And you don't spit beer out when you taste it.
You dedicate the last chapter of this book to the future of beer, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And which is the future of a so important part of our life?
Well, I would say that the future lies simply in the dynamism that we see in the craft beer industry. We can't predict exactly where that creative endeavor is going to go, and we do know that it is threatened by the shadow of big beer, which is still 90% of the market, which is buying up small breweries left and right. And as we all know, those breweries will not be encouraged to be experimental, but they'll be encouraged to produce a consistent product, because that's what big beer does. So it's a difficult situation for a very imaginative industry to be working in. But our prediction is that there's just too much creative energy there for it to be contained. So we have to be hopeful for the future.
I agree completely that the beauty of it and its future is in its innovativeness. You know, wine has some aspects of that, but not nearly as extreme as beer does. I mean, you know, 3 years ago, let's say 5 years ago, no one even, I mean, only people in New England knew about hazy IPAs, and now they're all the rage everywhere. So these different kinds of brews that are popping up, sours, all kinds of really cool stuff that are popping up, are just a testament to how innovative brewing is, beer making is. So I think Ian's right about that. It's all in how innovative and how unfettered we can keep the brewing process.
Yeah.
And maybe after, we hope, after coronavirus, the nearest production will be more confident and more usual than before, when globalization of all the goods were absolutely necessary. Yeah.
Well, as evolutionary biologists, we are aware that small populations and relative isolation is where diversity comes from.
Yeah.
So in theory, this should be good for overall diversity. Whether it will mean that you'll be able, as an individual living in a particular place, to sample that whole diversity is a different question.
Yes.
I've been doing pretty good here in New York City with sampling the diversity.
But we don't have that many breweries in New York City. It's just like in Paris, they didn't make wine. So you got wine from all over France in Paris. In Paris, if you went to Burgundy, you're going to get Burgundy wine. You went to Bordeaux, you could get Bordeaux wine. You went down to the south, you get the Vin de Languedoc, and so on. But if you went to Paris, you had everything.
Yeah.
And it could be the same.